Welcome everyone. We've had a brilliant day of discussing policy here today, both in the hall, but we've also had people engaging online through Twitter, through Facebook and all other means as well. So now we have our online Q&A session with Jeremy and with Tom, where we can put some of the questions that you've asked through the day directly to you. So I'm going to start off with Paul from Salisbury.
That sounds like a PMQ type question.
Absolutely, I got this idea from somewhere else. I'm trying to think where. And Salisbury being a city very close to my heart as well. But Paul's asked, what plans do Labour have for making housing affordable and addressing the lack of homes in Britain today?
Fundamentally, the housing crisis is serious for everybody in this country, from those that are desperate and homeless to those that are living in overcrowded accommodation to those that are in insecure private rented accommodation, those that can't afford to buy, or those that have got adult children who can't afford to leave home. So it affects all across the piece. The government strategy is absolutely in the wrong direction. One is it sells local authority homes if they're over a certain value in high value areas. Secondly, it brings in pay to stay for people on a reasonable income who want to remain as council tenants. Thirdly, it gives very big discounts for right to buy, which reduces housing stock and encourages the development of speculative properties, often at the high end of the market, which are unaffordable for those in housing need. What we need is a balanced housing strategy. One, giving local authorities the power to invest in council housing. Secondly, to provide for shared ownership properties for much greater level. Thirdly, to ensure there is a regulation of the private rented sector so that it remains long-term tenancies and affordable, because the social consequences of 6-month tenancies in high rent areas means that those people who receive a benefit to remain in the property, often in work at the same time, are then forced to leave and often lose their jobs as a result of it. So we have a sort of a cycle of despair of the government's housing policy. Our strategy is build, our strategy is regulate, our strategy is to ensure much higher environmental standards. And one idea personally I would like to develop is that when we build every new property, we ensure all the appropriate environmental standards in the building of it, but we also insist on solar panels on the roofs of all new buildings so that they can help both with hot water and with electricity generation, to show that we are actually serious about improving our environment as a whole.
Brilliant, yeah.
For me, it's very simple. For 100 and odd years of history, we've always stood as a party that says people have a right to have a safe environment and a roof over their heads. And there's a generation out there, that generation of young workers who are under 30, if they live in a city, they're the first generation that will have a reasonable expectation they'll never be able to afford to buy their own home. And because the private rented sector is essentially about short-term lets, they can't lay down roots. Now that's just not right, is it? If you want to settle down, you want to sort of build your base in a community, to not be able to have that kind of security, I think is fundamental to what we are as human beings, and we need to put that right. I actually think that the 2020 election, for the first time in many general elections, could be the battleground could be over housing, and we're determined to make sure that we address the concerns that many millions of people in the UK have about how do they have a secure roof over their head.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was really important that that was our first question, because as you both highlighted, it's one of the fundamental things that we get raised with us in election campaigns. And with local elections, we've seen that Labour councils have even under these circumstances, been able to build
every event we do.
Housing.
On the way here this morning, I met a lady who was saying, "How are my grandchildren going to live on this island in Portland? They're never going to be able to afford their own home."
And it's there they grew up, I guess.
Yeah. And you all, the questions you get for PMQs, there's always housing questions.
Lots of housing. I was in Dursley yesterday in Stroud constituency, and there, good Labour council intervention. The former Lister site where the factory was is closed. It was industrial wasteland. It was bought for development. The developer didn't develop it. The council then, to their credit, bought the site, developed the whole thing, including community hospital, as well as council housing and private housing, very big mixed development. They've therefore developed the area, improved the community, provided good quality housing. And what's the Tory suggestion? If they get control of the council, they want to sell it.
Not right.
Sell what is a community asset for all the people of the area.
Yeah.
You couldn't get a more stark example of the difference in our values.
Absolutely.
The differences that Labour-led councils in Stroud make.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right, moving on, we've also had a question from Holly in Southampton, who has asked, how do you think Labour could best use new technology to keep local members engaged and informed of local and national campaigns, like the campaigns we've just been discussing?
Sure. Well, look, we're both incredibly committed to huge digital reform in the way the party gives members tools to organise its communities. We put a new digital team in place there. I think they're about 3 months in now, and they've been doing a lot of work with our members to ask what they're looking for from the party. And of course, we say to that, that it should be driven by them. The user experience is the most important thing. And what came out of the leadership and deputy leadership campaign is people want access to the Labour Party, not just on web platforms, but on their smartphones. So one of the things we're determined to do is give our activists the ability to go out and consult people on the doorstep using sort of applications that you can put data in on tablets and on your phone. But also the member's journey. When you first join the Labour Party, it's amazing when you sit down with a group of members and say, what are you looking for? And one of the things they've told us, which we weren't really aware of, was they want to know a lot more about our history. What is the philosophy that has underpinned our 100 years of history? What are the ideas that have made us who we are? And so we need to think about the content we put on our web platforms and how we arrange that. And if there's any members watching this, I would imagine that the ones watching a live stream event are probably a little bit more tech savvy than others perhaps, then we want their ideas as well. People always say to me, why don't you make all your MPs and councillors use social media? And I used to say, I think all MPs should use social media. Now I say there are some MPs who shouldn't be allowed 1,000,000 miles anywhere near social media. Yep. But there is no doubt that as a party, that if you're an elected representative, using social media and digital tools is a supplement to how you go out and campaign and organise your communities. And they need us to support them with training, with sort of mentoring, with all the sort of things you do when you're trying to build a digital movement. And we're determined to do that as quickly as possible. So I've told all our professional head office staff, the two of us want to get to the Labour Party conference this year so we can genuinely show the party the journey we're beginning to go on in digital reform. We won't get it all done overnight, but we do need to make significant progress over the summer to make sure that we're responding to what our members are demanding.
Brilliant.
Jeremy. It's the Tom and Jerry digital show. It's a serious thing because technology moves on, we've got to move with it. There was a time when nobody had radios, then they had telephone, then they had television, then they had computers, and then eventually you effectively get a merging of all those media into something that is highly sophisticated and absolutely brilliant. And so everybody with a sophisticated phone can access any information from anywhere. But Tom's right, you have to point people in a direction if they want to know more about Labour history, and I absolutely welcome that. Put it there. It can be done. It can be done in a brilliant kind of interactive way. And I think today's been good because we've shown that we begin to develop in that area. One person said to me today, I don't know if they said this to you, Tom, that they would like us to have our own digital channel available all the time. Now, 24/7 broadcasting is quite an undertaking for us to have, but there's no reason why we couldn't have some sort of regular spot on which people could live stream access. There's various ways it could be done.
I certainly think there are a lot more events like this that can be enriched and be a deeper experience if we had live streaming. So one of the things we're going to go and do at the end of this event is just look at how many people logged on throughout the day, which particular sessions interested them. Are there ways we could share information in slightly different ways so that members who aren't able to travel come together? And when it comes to our digital platforms, we've got some of our whiz kids who are sort of testing prototypes now. We're not ready to go public with it yet.
They're all in this room, actually.
There's a lot of them in this room. They're sitting behind these cameras, and it's very spooky. And they're laughing at us, but because we sound like we're...
They're not laughing with us, they're laughing at us.
No, because they're thinking that's two fellas who think they know a little bit about technology, but we really do.
Little learning's a dangerous thing.
But what it does do, I mean, I always say this, social media gives you, what is it in its essence? It gives you the ability to organise groups very, very quickly with low barriers to entry. And if you're a political organiser, it's obviously a great tool.
There's also a thing about the method we put across. I was looking at what happened in the Canadian election. Trudeau sent out a lot of short, sharp messages on social media. None of them were more than 45 seconds long. And we send out stuff from my office every week on things that have happened, usually in Parliament elsewhere. And if we do it relatively short, you get a huge number of views. So we did a short thing on the budget. We got 1.5 million views.
See, that's amazing, isn't it?
Brilliant.
Yeah.
But you have to make it a bite-sized length.
Yeah. Thank you. And just remind you all as well of what Tom just said, which is we want your ideas too. This is not an exclusive, pot of knowledge we've got here. We need those people who are creative with online tools, who are watching in as well.
All here behind the camera.
And obviously the ones we already have advantage of. So next we have a question from Kerith in Plymouth, who has asked, and this is, I think, the last question very relevant to today, but also this question is very much about this region, as well as the rest of the UK, which is what has Labour got to offer rural areas of England?
A great deal. Rural areas are often poor. Rural areas have hidden poverty, and behind the privet hedge and the wisteria, there can be utter misery and deprivation. I grew up in a rural area in Shropshire. Well, I was born down the road in Wiltshire, and I remember as a young person canvassing with my mum and dad, and you would go to what on the outside were absolutely beautiful, idyllic country cottages. They were farm workers' cottages, they were tied cottages. The conditions inside were absolutely appalling. No bathrooms, all this sort of thing. Okay. Things have moved on a bit since then and changed quite a lot since those days. But you still find pockets of the most incredible levels of rural poverty. And because the bus services have all collapsed, there was a time when there was a good rural bus service, when we had publicly owned bus services that guaranteed a bus service to every village. Gone. So if you don't have a car, you can't get about. You're therefore either stuck with having to get a taxi if you don't have a car to get to shops, or use the one shop in the village, which might be quite expensive. So there's issues of transport, there's issues of housing, there's issues of rural development. Now, I don't think every village should be kept in aspic. I think there should be some development in every village. I think there should also be development of businesses and industry, small industries in villages, because farming has changed a great deal. Farming is not going to be the big employer. It is essentially more capital and labour intensive now than it ever was. I mean, I've sort of noticed this over the years, the way the whole farming industry has changed. And so to maintain a rural economy, you have to have local authority intervention, you have to have planning intervention, you have to have a strategy for it. You can't just leave it to the market and retirement homes or second homes and so on, because if you go to some villages where maybe half or three-quarters of the homes are second homes, it's an absolutely dead and depressing community to live in. So for 9 months a year, you're walking down a road with boarded up houses for their own protection for the winter, while you're living there waiting for the people to return come the spring. Well, come on. That's not a good way to do things. The French do it much better, and they have much better levels of intervention in planning ideas, ensuring there are post offices and bakeries and so on in the villages. Now, we can learn from other people. There's no shame in learning from other people. Sometimes it even works. But the bigger issue has to be infrastructure as a whole. That means digital, it means broadband, it means railways, it means buses.
definitely. Broadband, I absolutely can testify to in this region, as we said, Tom.
I mean, broadband access is terrible in a lot of rural areas, and in this day and age, that's just unacceptable, because it means they're at an economic disadvantage from day one. So I think a lot more work on rural broadband and access to public transport in rural areas has got to be a key platform in the build-up to 2020. So we're doing a lot of work on this with Lillian Greenwood, who leads for us on transport, and Lillian is very aware that there's a huge demand out there, that Labour sort of highlights this issue and brings it to the fore.
Countryfile did a programme a couple of months ago about all the bus services that were going to close as of yesterday. As of the 1st of April, when the budget for bus subsidy was cut in county after county, and whole services just going. Well, that's not acceptable.
Yeah, no, and it is a reality that people are facing right now. Okay, now moving on to Stuart from Southampton, who has asked, what, in your view, are the main benefits of EU membership that affect people in low-wage jobs?
Do you want to start, Tom?
Well, I think, Claire, you should answer that one.
Oh, I can happily start on this one.
I think you're the best one to start on this, Claire.
For those of you that don't know, I have the very good fortune to be the Labour MEP for the South West of England, but before I did that, I was a trade union official for 20 years, and I know how much we relied on European legislation in workplaces to protect people, paid holidays, protecting agency workers. I and my Labour colleagues are campaigning on 0-hour contracts to see if we can bring in protection at a European level on 0 hours contracts. But there are countless protections: equality, the right to equal treatment, the right to equal pay, all of these.
Transfer employment, 2P undertakings.
The protection for people who are finding that their work's been transferred from one employer to another. Memorably, a trade union member described it to me as a sort of form of slavery, that they had no control over who owned the company that they worked for, but only through Europe did they have protection of their terms and conditions as a consequence.
Before 2P, I used to be like you, a union organiser. Before 2P, what would happen is a company would change hands, and the new employer would cherry pick who they want.
Absolutely.
And make sure that those that were active in the union were not wanted. Yeah. It was as blunt as that.
Yeah.
And when it comes to the referendum at the end of June, of course, it's a social Europe that Labour stands for. Yeah. David Cameron wants to undermine some of those reforms that we won. It was actually signed off by John Major, but it was the Labour movement that campaigned for it. And so when it comes to the campaign after the May elections, in the short campaign for the referendum, we're going to be highlighting the aspects about a workers' Europe and the kind of Europe we want to see, we've got a vision for. So it's really important that our distinct voice in this debate in the referendum is heard, and we're both going to be talking about that in weeks to come.
Tom's last point is an important one, because we still have inferior conditions in Britain on rights to trade union membership, rights to representation, and those have to be addressed. And also what has to be addressed is this question of industry-wide agreements in the construction industry, where employers want sometimes to bring in a whole new workforce, get rid of the existing workforce which thought they were covered by an industry-wide agreement on wage rates, conditions and so on. They're often not, because there's no legal protection for them, and so they lose out entirely, and the employer then gets in probably quite skilled workforce at much lower wages. There has to be protection of traditional wages and conditions, as well as respect for the minimum wage and condition standards that we have. Those two things are not opposites. Those two things are actually complementary to each other.
Absolutely, and it's another thing that we see, and we saw that problem through the Lindsey oil refinery and all the problems we saw around those construction projects in 2007, 2008. But also what I see very clearly is that you have a model of a European model, if you like, where trade unions and employers are seen as two parties that need to work with government to bring together policies. So we've been talking about industrial strategy all day, and the European model sees trade unions as being very much part of that conversation. And that's something I think we need also to learn, as you said, from that model, have that kind of tripartite involvement.
British Tories seem to exempt themselves from the idea of talking to trade unions. I want to see us having a national industrial policy that involves trade unions, a national industrial policy that has a national investment bank that can put investment in where necessary, direct investment. And hang on, those that have worked in the steel industry all their lives know a bit about it. They're the ones that make the steel.
Yep.
They're the ones that make the cars. They're the ones that make the washing machines. They're the ones that do the work.
Yep. It's using everyone's talents. Yep. Right. Not unrelated, but in terms of making sure the people that we are standing up for. Leanne from Lincolnshire has asked, what can we do to make sure sick and disabled people are treated fairly and with respect? And how can we make sure people get the support that they need?
Start with that, Tom.
Well, let's firstly look at what happened in the budget last week. And John McDonnell will want me to remind all our members of this. The government proposed that there would be a £3,000 benefit given to capital gains taxpayers, 0.3% of the population, whilst taking away £3,000 from hundreds of thousands of disabled people in Britain. You know, no wonder Ian Duncan Smith, in finally getting something right in his life, said that George Osborne's policies were targeting a particular group of people and disbenefiting those people that didn't support the Conservative Party. No wonder Ian Duncan Smith concluded that George Osborne was dividing society, not uniting it. And we've got a very different view of the world. And, you know, if I can say, one of the distinctive characteristics of Jeremy's leadership is we're not going to cross on the other side and walk by those people. We're going to stand up for them and make sure that their voice is heard in Westminster. And that's why we were campaigning so vigorously against those unfair cuts when they were announced in the budget.
We made a long journey on this. 1970 Chronic Sick and Disabled Act for the first time recognised the needs of people with disabilities. Alf Morris, a Labour MP, introduced that. We then moved on to recognition of carers' needs. We moved on to Disability Discrimination Act. We moved on to personal independence payments and independent living fund. The Tories have attacked PIPs. Okay, at the moment they've backed off slightly. They've regionalised or localised the independent living fund. In most cases that's meant it's disappeared because it was never ring-fenced. We have to have a policy together which we will have, which will protect those issues, which will ensure there is no discrimination within our society, but above all recognises that people with disabilities, yes, they have a disability. It doesn't mean they're not able to contribute, doesn't mean they're not able to do something, doesn't mean they're not able to live independently. People have got to be able to make the best of their lives. It's up to the rest of us to contribute to that expenditure to make sure they can make the best of their lives. I fear that with the policies they're putting forward, you're going to end up with more people put into a sort of high dependency care place when they ought to be able to live independently at home. That's got to be the wrong direction altogether to go for this country.
And again, continuing a theme of today, which has been around digital inclusion, Susan from Ramsgate has asked, how can Labour contribute to improving digital literacy and inclusion, which will then help us in our campaigning?
Well, Tom and I are learning, but he's learnt more than I have.
About digital inclusion, I mean, for me, it's access to the net. For many people are either priced out of it, or and we've talked about how people are, because of geography, are not digitally included. And you know, for me, I think if we can say at the next election that every citizen should have the right to high-speed access to the internet, then that is a very powerful message we're sending out. But also in the way we teach our kids in schools about digital literacy. You know, I'm pleased to say my kids' school is very good at this, and I've sort of been amazed at how the curriculum has changed so quickly in recent years, so that, you know, children are given those tools they need to manoeuvre around the digital space. It's actually we old folk who need a bit more support for that. And that's about what you do in the FE sector. It's about how you breathe life into institutions that reach out to the community. It's how civic groups can be engaged in that process. And you know, I'm very, very committed to that. I'm a former digital minister, so I know how important it is. And it's not just culturally and important to us, it's actually economically important, because you know, it's as important as being able to read and write, in my view. If you're not digitally literate, then there are many opportunities that you're going to miss, and we can't afford to do that if we're sort of competing globally.
Yeah.
We've got to teach the kids. The BBC trying to do in teaching kids in computer programming, I think, is a brilliant idea. But there has to be real accessibility, and I'm always conscious of this. When people come and see me at my constituency advice bureau, I always ask them for an email address. Maybe I'm not going to write them an email, maybe I won't need to, but I always ask them, partly as a way of finding out how many are of access. Usually about 2/3 of the people have some kind of access. The number who actually use it is probably slightly less than that. Now, that is not necessarily a microcosm of the entire community, because these are people who are often in a very difficult situation that come and see me. But it does mean that around, probably even in the most sophisticated urban areas, 1/3 of the population probably don't have regular access to the internet. So we've got to be slightly cautious of doing everything online unless we're going to provide those facilities. Therefore, libraries are important. Libraries are important for books, obviously. They're also important as a point of access to the internet. And I go to my local libraries and they have a queue waiting to use the internet, so they get more computers in, queue gets bigger. That's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing at all, because it shows people are accessing in that way. But it's also using it for learning and recognising it's a technology not to be afraid of. It's a technology for all of us to use. Technology is there for all of us. It's just to make sure that we all get the benefit of it.
And I would add into this that I think we need to be explicit as well, because I mean, in my lifetime, we've seen huge changes in the jobs that are available to people. I mean, hands up, I trained as a secretary when I left school because I'd always have work. There aren't any secretaries left anymore.
Who advised you of that?
Yeah, my mother. But you know, we have to include lifelong learning, that people can go back to education and be, so when things change, when things develop, people are able to develop.
Everybody's always going to need electrician, carpenter and plumber.
That's what I should have trained as.
You're always going to need those, aren't you? You can't do without those.
I used to work for that union, so I know them well. Yeah,
yeah, you do, absolutely. Right. We're coming near to the end of this, so I'm going to squeeze in one last one to both of you, because you now have got some very busy weeks coming up, because we have the local elections and the Police and Crime Commissioner elections on the 5th of May. So you'll be working towards that. And then following on from that, we've got the referendum on our membership of the EU on the 25th of June. So when we get through those elections, after the European referendum, what are you planning to do with your first weekend off? And that was asked by Mo in Birmingham.
Mo must be one of your constituents, Tom. They need to know. Is she from West Brom or Birmingham?
It just says Birmingham.
Okay.
So I might well be going to find a seaside resort with a fabulously clean beach, a blue flag beach delivered by the European Union. How's that for a politician's answer?
Well, it's got to be in the South West.
There's got to be Weymouth. That sounds like Weymouth to
me. Brilliant.
Me, I think I'll do what I often do on a Saturday morning, have a walk around my constituency and listen to people's problems, which I do a lot of, and I quite enjoy that. And then I guess it's going to be a bit of weeding on the allotment. A lot of weeding on the allotment, because there'll be a lot of weeds.
You're not getting
and
much of a chance to do that.
It'll be too early for fruit, unfortunately.
So have you got any last messages that you want to give to people that have engaged with today and who are obviously online now?
For me, no, if you've persevered this long, thank you. Share your ideas with us. We've tested some new ideas out. Well, why don't Google us and find our email addresses? That's all I can think of right now. But our digital team are, you'll find them through the party website. This has been a test for us, and we're going to try new ideas out. I hope people have found it useful. If you think you know how we can improve it, or there's things you think we've done wrong, just let us know. We want to hear from you.
I want to say thank you to anyone that's been watching today, taking part today, sending questions in or hearing answers today. Thank you very much for that. The party is big, the party is open, and we want those ideas. We want to share those ideas. We're all going to get things wrong at times, we're going to get things right at times, but we go forward by a fertilisation of ideas, and so the website is there, the ideas are there. The interesting suggestion that came up to me today was partly about campaigning methods and how you get issues across on economic strategy, but it was also about how we communicate and whether or not we shouldn't think of a permanent online sort of channel presence, something like this. This is a big issue, but we're going to have to analyse very carefully everything that we did today. I want to say a huge thank you to everyone that organised today, put today together, and it shows that there is huge potential in using social media to get strong political messages across. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. And as you've seen, we wanted this to be the start of our digital engagement with everybody, and we look forward to continuing that engagement as well. Thank you.